everybody, it's Amy Anamkara, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So today I had a really great conversation with Tom Tierney. So Tom is a funeral director and an owner of the John Tierney Funeral Home, which is located in Manchester, Connecticut. But he is really changing a lot of things that are happening here in Connecticut. And one of the things that he and his funeral home is offering is something called Aquamation. And I was really interested in learning about it. So I said, let me just call him and let's have a sit down and talk about it. So let's just get on with it. So good morning, Tom. How are you today?
Excellent. How are you, Amy?
I'm well. It's rainy here. I'm sure it's rainy there.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah. So Tom, you are a funeral director, right, at the John F. Tierney, and you're also the owner of the funeral home. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Awesome. So you and I already had a conversation together, and what I got from the conversation is that you're kind of a rebel in this industry here in Connecticut.
Yeah, I can go with that. Sure. I mean,
You're starting up something kind of new, and you're looking at your industry a little bit differently. Is that correct?
yeah, I'm definitely taking a different perspective on what people need.
Right. And so you started Aquamation in
Yes,
your funeral home, which is different than cremation. So
correct.
why? So first of all, Aquamation is really using instead of fire, it's using water, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Water is the vehicle that helps to complete the process. So there is no fire involved at all.
Okay. And so how did you decide that Connecticut needed this? Because I think we do.
Good. Yeah, I think we do too, and I kind of can get into it's going to be a moment because it's a little story of
That's
how I
okay.
got here.
Great.
But so in 1956, my grandparents opened John F. Tierney Funeral Home, and then in 1983, my dad took it over, and it was a real slow go at it. We were the eighth funeral home in Manchester at that point, and it was just a slow build and just building trust with the community and the folks around us. And then my grandfather died in 1983, and my dad took over, and he ran the business up until 2020. And I always looked up to my dad, and I kind of knew that this was going to be my path going into the funeral industry. And I was never pushed into it, but I always just was drawn to it. I loved the fact that he took care of people when they needed him. So was licensed as a funeral director in 2003 and worked with him up until 2020, and still to this day work with him. It's just a little different roles now. But in 2020, I became the owner of John F. Tierney Funeral Home. And through the pandemic and then the next couple of years, just seeing how fortunate we are, I'm blessed by the hard work of their generations of my parents and my grandparents building us to what we are now. And last year, I got to a point where I was like, well, what's my piece going to be? What can I bring to this business? And I always thought for most of my career that it was going to be more locations, bigger as far as a footprint goes with real estate and funeral homes. That's the growth pattern of family-owned funeral homes. So that's what I started looking at. And then as I looked at that, I kind of saw that there was different things happening in different areas as far as how we were taking care of the deceased. And I knew I loved what my dad did here at our location. And with that, I decided maybe I don't want to expand as far as they call it rooftops in the industry, which it's kind of not the best term, but it's actual funeral home locations. And I started looking at alternative means of disposition. And I found out that alkaline hydrolysis, aquamation, water cremation, all meaning the same exact thing, but alkaline hydrolysis has been legal in the state of Connecticut since 2016, and nobody had done it.
Right.
And I see them popping up around the country a little bit. And I said to myself, well, what is this? And then I looked a little deeper and I saw that Desmond Tutu had sought out this form of disposition for himself. And I was like, well, that's an environmental, they call him an eco warrior. And as I got a little deeper, I saw the Mayo Clinic was doing it. UCLA Med School is doing it with their medical donors for their medical schools as far as the disposition. I'm like, these people have done the research on the science. I'm like, what's going on here? Why isn't anybody doing this? And I couldn't find a good answer. I looked into a couple of different companies and saw that Bioresponse Solutions and Aquamation was a solid company that has some systems that have been time tested, and decided that I was going to look into that a little bit more. And the real reason for doing it is because there's a void in the industry. There's a conversation that needs to be had that nobody was having. We had fire and burial, and the footprint of those two things are very similar as far as emissions, carbon footprint, climate friendliness. And I think this is a conversation that deserves to be at the table for folks to be able to have the opportunity to make this choice. Let them. I'm a process person, and your process is my job. So let this be a choice as a part of the process.
Right. Right. So, so when did you purchase the tank? When did you first get going? I mean, it's a big investment.
Yeah, it was a huge leap, but it was last year of let's see, I think it was August, September when I made the initial contractual obligation with BioResponse, and then delivery occurred right around Christmas, and then construction ensued kind of around what the system needed. So the first alkaline hydrolysis water cremation occurred in Connecticut on March 18th of this year.
March 18th of 2024?
Correct.
Incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And how many have you done since then?
I think the number right now is currently about 55.
Wow.
Yeah. People, families are, it's a conversation they want to have. They are drawn to it as far as people from outside of our general service area are seeking it out a little bit. And then the folks that we're fortunate to serve within our own community, when you present them with the option that our on-site option for cremation is done by water, are you okay with that? This is what it looks like. They say most of the time, not all of the time, that they would prefer it. It just feels gentler. And so there's that whole aspect of it as well.
Right.
At the end of the day, my job is to help you through the loss of a loved one. And I kind of look at it like, if you can hit the pillow at night and be a little bit more at peace, then I've done it, you know?
Right.
And I think that this really, really can add to that for people. It's a comforting thing to know that they can die in the way that they lived.
Right. Right. You know, it makes me think, you know, we came from water, right? We came from our mothers' womb, which is from
Oh,
water.
yeah,
And it's a way of, that full cycle again, which I think is beautiful.
absolutely. Yep.
So how do you approach the topic with them? I mean, I would imagine that most people are not familiar with it.
Yeah, yeah. Most of the families that um, we work with are not familiar with it. It's brand new to this area, and it's it's a lot easier than I anticipated it being. Um, I was trying to put my own little stamp on things by doing this water cremation to add to the our service offerings through Tierney Funeral Home, and I found that it's still the work of my grandparents and parents that people trust us to make a good decision, and so there's that trust factor that this is if we're doing it, it's legitimate, and I appreciate that, but the I just offer it at the end of the arrangement process as our on-site option is done by water. It's right here. They never leave our care, and flame cremation is also still available. And if that's something you're more comfortable with, that's okay. So it kind of put it out there that way, and then the questions come, and we talk about it, and what does it look like? Why are we doing it? And we go through that part of it, and a lot of the time folks say, you know what, this is a decision that I'm willing to make. I like it.
Yeah, yeah. So what is the actual procedure with the process once the person has been brought to you?
Yep. So at the time of death, we transfer them back here to the funeral home. In the state of Connecticut, there's a 48-hour waiting period between the time of death and the time we're allowed to cremate or aquamate. And there's authorizations that need to be signed, Connecticut state permit, and fill out the death certificate, obtain the burial permit. All of these things need to occur. So that normally takes that 48 hours anyways. Um, they stay in our care in a climate controlled area. And then once the paperwork is done, they're brought to the aquamation room, and they go into a vessel, and that vessel is then put into the system. And there's a potassium hydroxide and sodium hydroxide are the two alkali components. And through a formula determined by age, weight, and different medical history type things, we come up with a proper amount of alkali to place into the vessel with the person. And then there's a time determination, and that time can run anywhere between, say, 9-10 hours to 14-15. And you basically press start on the vessel, let it do its thing for the
Right.
period. And
Right.
yeah, and at the end of the period, the result is calcified bone, that is the same result that you would get from fire cremation. And that bone is then processed down into what we commonly refer to as ashes. And that's a step that I found a lot of folks aren't aware of. By starting this conversation, that conversation has come up. They're like, well, wait a second. After fire cremation, it's not just the ashes. And I say, no, it's processed from, there's always a processing that occurs. And
Right.
they're like, oh, and then that almost comforts them to know that, well, how do I know what I'm getting back? Or like, it just feels like this is a little bit cleaner because it is. um,
Right.
so there's a drying period and then a processing to get the ashes back into and it's almost like a powder form rather than a more granular form that you would see from flame cremation, which I found interesting. So, but that's the process.
And so what happens with the fluid?
It is returned to the water treatment facility locally. So that was one thing that I had to get clearance from our municipality in order to move forward with doing this project. And there obviously at first was like, wait, what?
Right,
And then,
right.
like, what's going on? And then once they did their research, they were on board completely. And I've talked to some folks within that industry on the development and engineering and the water treatment actual folks that work within the plants. And potassium hydroxide is a chemical that they use commonly to treat their water. And so the end result of the fluid that goes back to the water treatment facility is perfectly clean and fine for the water treatment facility. And as a part of that process, folks don't really want to consider it too much because it's not a pleasant consideration, whether it be water, fire, burial. It's
Right.
not something we want to spend a lot of time thinking about. But I can say simply that with the warm water circulating and the potassium hydroxide, sodium hydroxide combination, it accelerates the natural decomposition of the soft tissues of the individual into its most simple building blocks.
Mhm.
So there is no DNA, there is no RNA. The vessel that is our body is no more. And that fluid is not anything but fluid going back to the system to be regenerated again.
It's not Tom. It's not Tom going back into the water,
No,
right? Yeah.
no, it's not Tom going back into the water. And that, again, that was an obstacle for me coming from a traditional funeral home, looking at like what's going on here. And when I saw that there's no DNA, there's no RNA, and this is a stable effluent to go back into the system, I was completely fine with that. They do make and have different systems. Some of those collect the essence, which is what they call the water afterwards. And that can be used as a fertilizer, where it's actually good for the environment. My thought was that this is our first step, and I wasn't comfortable that it was going to be I think it was a bridge too far to have that conversation with families right now,
Right.
for your everyday family. Some people will love that idea, but I don't think the general population would be as comfortable with that. And from a business perspective, I really needed to focus on taking one step at a time and getting to where we need to be. So that's why I chose the bioresponse alkaline hydrolysis system.
So if somebody wanted, they could maybe take a gallon.
Yes, not from my system
Okay.
specifically, because we don't have a collection capability. What I do have is the opportunity to offer folks a small portion of the water, but it would be after there's a rinsing that's done, and it would be after that process. So it's not the actual effluent from the remains,
Right.
but it's part of the process. But I don't collect the actual effluent.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so how are people choosing aquamation over cremation? Are you finding that's becoming more popular in your business?
Well, in house, yes, because it's here. And now, as we get the word out, there are going to be a lot of people that do choose it over cremation. It just aligns with their values more than what they see currently available in the industry. And you know, the funeral industry is, I'm passionate about what we do and being there for folks and being there for families, but the end result was two different options, basically, as far as disposition goes, and that's burial or flame cremation. And that's very known and methodical, and we've got processes for that, and the industry's built around those things. And when you look at some of the larger funeral homes or the corporations, well, they own their own crematories with fire. So their interest in progress as far as the environmental concerns might be dampened by the fact that they can already offer fire, and it is a faster process, so they can do more volume. And that's a perspective. And my perspective was a little different, that in order to grow as an industry, like it sounds a little cliche, but I was looking to grow here when I didn't realize it. Like,
Right.
I think I'm getting personal growth from this and providing an example for my family. And with that, hopefully that's contagious and other folks around us will start to do it.
Right.
And I think that is a good way to look at things, I hope. I'm going to do the best I can, and I think this is the next best thing to do.
Do you know of any other funeral homes in Connecticut that are considering doing this?
Yes, there is one that is, it's in the Torrington area, and they were in the process of getting a system around the same time I was in the process of getting the system. It's a different manufacturer, so I don't think that's in effect yet, and I'm just not sure what the holdup is on that end, but I'm cheering for them.
Yeah, you're a leader, though. I mean, you're an example.
Yeah, I hope so. And that's probably one of the first times I'm a good example, but we'll take it, So I want, my motivation would be off if I were to say I want to be the only one to do it. I encourage other people to get involved, and I think that's only going to help us offer families more solutions that meet their needs. It's not my job to dictate what you're going to do with your loved one. It's my job to make it easier.
Right. What are other trends that you're seeing in the death industry as far as burial? Are you doing more of the preparing the body for a natural burial? Are you doing any of that?
Not locally. We don't have a green cemetery locally and I haven't gotten too many questions on that. It's
I know there are 3, and that's it.
okay, yeah, and I haven't received that a whole lot myself, but I'm in the process of getting involved with the Green Burial Council, and making sure that I match up, because all these doors start to open, and it's like,
Right.
oh, why am I not doing this? I need to be a part of this. I need to explore this, and so I'm in the process of doing that, and as a part of alkaline hydrolysis and water cremation, going to get more involved in the green burial end of things, because that's another thing that folks are looking for. As far as industry trends, and I don't even know if it's a trend or an evolution of the industry, but terramation, human composting is something that is happening. I think it's mainly on the West Coast at this point. I know there was some legislation that was brought up in Connecticut, and I believe it's legal in New York. I'm not positive. And there's some committee that's doing some research on terramation in Connecticut, and I think I'm going to get involved in that conversation a little bit. There are some things that were brought up to me on that were eye-opening as far as just how careful you might have to be because it's a longer process.
Right.
You got to be careful of somebody going into the business and not being successful, and then what happens with these individuals that are in process. So I think there's insurance and some things that need to be looked at before it goes into effect in Connecticut, but it will. It's coming. I mean, and I love the traditions and the ways that we take care of families historically, and I can appreciate that. And I can also look forward to the future of how we can better do it. And they
Right.
don't have to be mutually exclusive. There's a lot of folks in our industry who is, nope, this is the way it's done. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can meet you right where you're at and do the best we can each individual time. Another thing that's not fine, well, it is kind of final disposition, but parting stones, have you heard of them?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, that was introduced to me when a good friend of mine's wife passed away of cancer, and he said, Tom, I saw this on Shark Tank. She wants to go on adventures with us. This is what I want to do. And I said, okay, I don't know how to do it, but let me figure it out.
Right.
And
Right.
so I looked into it, and it was simple. We got in touch with the Parting Stone Company. They sent us out some information, and we went ahead and Angela's remains turned to stone. And since that time, gosh, we've had, and that was at April 21st of 23 was when she passed away. And since that time, I've had about 25 families decide to do parting stones. And it's just a nice thing to be able to hold and touch and feel. And it's like a worry stone, or you can have it on your table and people don't know what it is and you know what it is, or
Right.
Just have it with you.
You could, stick it in your pocket and go for a hike.
Exactly.
No?
And she wanted to go on adventures with them, and that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, wherever they go, they're going to take a stone and leave it in a special place, and that's where she'll be.
I love it. I love it. I mean, I spend quite a bit of time visiting cemeteries. I love to go to cemeteries. I love looking at the stones, but it's a very lonely place. People don't go back to the cemeteries for, they might go in the beginning, maybe the first couple of years, and then it's forgotten.
Yeah.
I think
it does happen.
And I've seen, people do, put ashes in jewelry and turn them into, diamonds, which is pretty cool. So there's a lot of interesting things that are definitely going on. So
the coral reef urns, where you can have an urn made and it helps regenerate coral reefs. So that's more in the Florida. Yeah, there's some really, really interesting things. And it's like, that's like, we started the conversation with you're a rebel in the industry, and it's like, yeah, well, if that's rebellious, then heck yeah, I'm all for it. Like, if if it's gonna help and it matches up with the loves of the individual, then let's go for it.
Right. And just like you said, you're meeting people where they are and you're educating them, and then they get to make the decision. But the thing is that there are so many more options than there used to be.
Right.
It's great.
It's, I don't know if it's the right thing to say, but it's an exciting time to be a funeral director.
It is. Well, I mean, I'm an end of life doula, and it is an exciting time to talk about this. People are interested now. It seems to be more and more people are death curious, and we need to start really, ramping up the conversations. We're all going to get there. So
exactly. Well, it's a definite, right? It's going to be the result for everyone. And I think as society has gotten more comfortable talking about other social, political topics and things like that, death can be one of them. And say, okay, well, how do you want to be remembered, and how do we need to remember you? Because oftentimes, you'll hear, oh, don't do anything, just cremate me, I don't want anything at all. No, no. Well,
Yes.
that's great, and it's a selfless perspective that the individual might think that they're having, but then again, those that are left behind, they have needs too, and we got to make sure that they realize that you have a voice in how you remember the loved one as well. I always tell people, like, if you're doing a simple cremation or whatever it might be, that's absolutely fine. But even if it's not with me, do something, have a little memorial gathering, or a specific time set to talk about them, or whatever, is big or as little as it might be. Do yourself that favor to remember them a little bit,
Right.
because it helps with the grieving process is a real thing, and it doesn't have a specific path. There's not steps that you can follow and say, oh, okay, here I am now, but it is a process, and it's a unique one for everybody.
Right, right. I agree with that. I mean, I feel like families need to everybody needs to be included in the decision. I think
Yeah.
about like my own, and it was funny that you said the whole thing about, just put me in a box and, whatever, send me off into the ocean or whatever. And I used to think that way. I used to joke about it, just put me in a pine box and whatever. I don't really care, right?
Yeah. Right.
Now I have a different perspective where I want them to, what would you like? What would you like to do with me? You know? And it's a difficult conversation for them, but giving them, different options and um I, they're being left behind. So they have to live with that.
Right.
So and I want them to feel comfortable with that. So yeah, so I do think it's an important decision. So yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a personal question. What's going to happen with you? What are you going to do? What are your decisions as far as how you want to be buried? Or what's
Well,
going to happen to you? Have you thought about it?
yeah. I think about it a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
It's kind of, and it evolves, right? It's changing.
yeah,
It's a fluid conversation for me. Um,
yeah.
I was brought up in you know, John F. Tierney Funeral Home, Manchester, Connecticut, built on the west side of town because the new church, Assumption Catholic Church, was right around the corner, and that was my foundation. That's kind of where I came from.
Right.
And as time has gone on, you know, what does faith look like to me evolves, and what does my life look like certainly has evolved over the years, and how in death I want to be, what my funeral to look like, or what my memorial to look like, or whatever that might be. Like 3 years ago, I would have said definitely a traditional Irish Catholic funeral, full burial, and give me a decent casket, because that's a
Right.
funeral director's funeral director. But now, since in the past year, the Aquamation, um, that's something that I would definitely consider, and that's where we are right now. But God willing, or higher power willing, or whatever we want to call it, I have some time left. I was thinking about it yesterday. I think I'm a little more than 50% there, though. I'm like closer to 60, 65%,
No,
in
I
my
hear
life.
you. Hmm.
And it was the first time I put it in that perspective. I was like, oh wow, I went over yeah, okay. Um, but maybe there's going to be some other form of disposition, something new. The terramation, I think I've determined, is not for me. Um, And it's not because of the composting part of it. I think there's a place for that, and if that is what people want, then please, like, let's figure out ways for you to do it. I just, I don't know that going into the garden, or like what type of garden will it be, or where is that earth going to go, or the compost going to go, like that was something that I was a little confused about, and it becomes not recognizable at that point. So I was just like, I don't think that's for me. But the fire cremation, I've always just been scared of. The fire part of it.
Yeah, yeah.
I love me a good campfire, but other than that,
Right.
so, but the water, is something that I would definitely consider.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm certainly leaning in that way, but I also love the natural burial. I love, the idea of being, wrapped in a Muslim, cloth or something like that, and being laid to rest right in the ground, I think is quite beautiful. But again, I'm really going to let my family kind of decide what works for them. I can certainly say, this is what oh, I'm sort of interested in this, but I don't know. Same with you. Like,
Yeah,
it's changing and who knows, but
yeah,
certainly,
and at that point, my time has ended, and I guess to have them involved in that conversation makes a whole lot of sense. Like,
yeah,
what's going to help them hit the pillow at night a little bit better, whether that be water cremation, or are they comfortable with the earth burial in a green cemetery. I was actually, and I didn't even consider that as an option for me, but it definitely would be. I would prefer to be buried intact naturally than to be flame cremated. So I'm going to figure it out. And eventually I'll write some things down and take it, but it's tough because it's such a moving target,
yeah,
right? And it's
yeah,
now in Manchester, where we are currently located, there's an Islamic cemetery that just opened up not too long ago. And I feel like now in the state of Connecticut, it's not legal for a funeral home to own a cemetery. So I couldn't be involved in the process at all.
right,
But I feel like there's an opportunity for a green cemetery to be located in Manchester. And because within the grounds of the Islamic cemetery, there's no vault requirement. They can be buried on the earth, from what I understand. And if that is the case, then that essentially is a green cemetery.
right.
And if that went through the zoning and is allowable, then I feel like either the municipality or some type of private organization could open a green cemetery in the future. So it's an exciting opportunity. It's just, again, it would be a big investment for an individual group to make. But I feel like the town of Manchester has an opportunity to do it. There's a couple of cemeteries with some space, and they can come up with a section or something for that.
Mhm. So I'm originally from Rhode Island, and I just did a little research on green cemeteries, and there's a green cemetery on an island called Prudence Island, which is right up the coast.
Yep.
And it's a park, and you can, be buried there. And I thought, oh my God, to that to me is just like amazing, just being in just wildflowers and, right off the coast of where I grew up. And it would just be like amazing.
Yep.
So, but you got to do your research, right?
Absolutely. So to be now that type of situation for green burial, or even like the terramation remnants, to be in a specific spot like that,
Right.
that you just changed my mind on that a little bit. Like I
Yeah.
don't want it in a vegetable garden necessarily, but to
Right.
be on an island in a natural environment, then so there's a lot happening.
There is. Well, Tom, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to educate me and
No,
my viewers and
two-way street.
yeah, right.
I
I guess
appreciate
so.
it.
Yeah. So let's stay in touch because I'm really interested in seeing what you're doing.
Great. I'd love to.
Great. Well, have a great rest of your day. Thank you guys so much for watching and have a wonderful day.
All right. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Mom. Take care.
Bye.
Talk soon.